After its 5th straight loss, can WVU football go into Manhattan, Kansas and get its 2nd straight win in the Little Apple? We'll preview this weekend's matchup right here on Mountaineer Game Day Extra.
And we'll share our first impressions of WVU men's basketball with the backyard brawl against Pitt coming up in just a couple of days. That and more right now.
This is really for our fans, okay? I appreciate them being here. They were here for our man trip at 9:30 in the morning, and it was in the upper 20s, low 30s. They were supportive, right? They were here through the bad first half. They were here through the second half, and a high percentage of them stayed. And I appreciate that, and that absolutely does not go unnoticed, okay? And we're not playing very well as a football team right now. Okay, and we've got a ton of work to do in this program. All right, but I'll tell you, and this is probably going to be on one of our worst days. But I'll tell you right now, we will build a successful program here.
That was head coach Neil Brown's message after West Virginia's 38-17 loss to Texas Tech over the weekend. Like he's been saying all year long, you've just got to trust the climb. But Nick, going to that game up against the Red Raiders, not much was going right for the Mountaineers. What was your biggest takeaway from the 5th straight loss?
So there's a lot to break down from this game, but to me, it was the play of the offense overall, with one thing standing out in particular that I know a lot of fans have really been keying in on recently. WVU had its highest offensive output in terms of total yardage, over 500 yards of total offense this season, plus outgained Texas Tech by 68 yards and still lost by 21 points. Now, it all comes down to red zone efficiency for WVU, and that's something that's going to be a sticking point for the Mountaineers throughout the rest of the season, but particularly against Kansas State. And we're going to talk about that matchup in just a little bit. But the thing that stood out to me was that we did get to see Jarrett Dagey for the first time, and really Coach Brown's comments after the game took a closer look and really examined this part of WVU's offense this season. That while we saw Jarrett Dagey, some of the things that have plagued the offense throughout the season, no matter who the quarterback is, whether it's been Austin Kendall, Jack Allison, or Trey Lowe, or now Jarrett Dagey, who's been the 4th different guy to take snaps for WVU this season, if you don't count Wildcat plays. But Dagey, when he was in there, it was 11 for 17, over 100 yards, and did have a touchdown pass. But he also was let down by some receivers who had some bad drops. There was still no running game when Dagey was in at quarterback. The same issues that have plagued WVU all season didn't really go away when Dagey was on the field. Now, Neil Brown says he's got a plan for quarterback this week. It's probable that we're going to see both Kendall and Dagey, not just against the Wildcats, but in all 3 of West Virginia's remaining games in order to get him some snaps. But even though fans have really been clamoring for a change at that position, as Brown said after the game, it didn't really solve everything or maybe anything at all. That's still, we're still going to have to see what happens here in the next couple of games. But it is a good sign for the future that Dagey got some snaps, that the coaching staff's able to evaluate him on a quarter plus of action against Texas Tech, and likely more to come still. So something that we will have to continue to keep an eye on as the season progresses.
Yeah, I wish quarterback was our biggest problem, was a direct quote from head coach Neil Brown after that game. And just touching quickly offensively, what the performance could have been for wide receiver Sam James. 14 receptions, 223 receiving yards. That's number 2 in a single game in program history. Some of those drops that you talk about, he even brought it up after the game, said he did have some costly drops. Would have liked to see what that performance could have been for him. But I think for me, one of my biggest takeaways has to be the play of West Virginia's defense. We were so high on the defense last week after that performance up against Baylor. 8 sacks, I believe, close to a dozen TFLs. But if you look at this week up against Texas Tech, now we did talk about the strength of the Red Raider offensive line, but West Virginia did not register a sack. I think only had 4 tackles for loss. And we saw some guys who we have not seen, really be key playmakers, be the key playmakers. And then the guys like Reese Donahue, Darius Stills that got it done at Baylor really didn't do much this week. We had talked to some of them before the game. They had said, this defense had set a new standard. You go into this, something that I actually talked about on Mountaineer Game Day last week was a key for me this team needed to stay confident and not get complacent. But talking to Reese Donahue now after this game, he had said this team had been facing adversity, but one thing it wasn't prepared for was learning how to face success. We saw that such a great performance up against Baylor. I think some of these guys, Nick, came in and thought, hey, we have really emerged here. We have improved. So now that it's already happened, as long as we just keep doing what we're doing, it will happen. But like we have seen with the offense, like we've seen with many other teams in the Big 12, that doesn't really matter. You still have to come in. You have to have that mindset. I think that these guys got a little complacent in the sense that they had thought they had that big game, and then they finally did arrive. And like Reese said, that was one of the points this week after the game is, okay, we know that we can face adversity, but now we have to do a much better job at handling success, because this was not the same defense that we saw in Waco go up against the Red Raiders and really just allowed Jet Duffy and company to come in here and really just do whatever they wanted offensively. And Coach Brown had said the same thing. Didn't make the plays on special teams, didn't make the plays on defense, and of course, you know, for the Mountaineers, this offense really just seems to struggle, and things aren't going to get any easier for West Virginia. It's got another tough opponent this weekend as it heads into Manhattan, and some guys have been either cleared to practice this week, and we know some guys won't be playing up against the Wildcats.
If you want a positive to look at, Angelica, it's the fact that it does seem that West Virginia's injury list is shrinking, which is good, because
only 4 this week?
That's right. Back in October, I mean, this list was longer than I think I saw somebody put it really well, adequately on Twitter, that it's longer than a CVS receipt.
Yeah.
I can't take credit for that joke. That's a good one. But so the guys, if you're taking a look at West Virginia's injury list, the 2 guys that stand out that are likely to be back this week are Josh Chandler, the linebacker who hasn't played since mid-October, got hurt, I believe, against Oklahoma, and hasn't played since, plus wide receiver Sean Ryan, a player who seemed to be hitting his stride before he was injured several weeks ago. Both guys have been cleared to practice. Brown pretty convinced that Chandler is going to be back. He was close last week before the Texas Tech game. It'd be great to see both of those guys in the lineup again. Questionable players this week for WVU include wide receiver TJ Simmons. He was injured during the Baylor game. Evan Staley, the kicker, also has missed the last 2 games. Casey Legg has been fulfilling kicking duties for WVU. Both of those guys questionable. Likely out this week again is defensive back Drayshawn Miller for WVU. So it's under half a dozen guys that are on the injury list, and it's possible that 2 or 3 of those guys are going to come back this week for WVU. You talked about the defense that gave up 5 consecutive touchdowns in the first half to Texas Tech. Having Josh Chandler back in the lineup, back in the middle there at linebacker, would be huge for WVU as the Mountaineers get ready to go up against K-State. And as we talk about that matchup, Angelica, there's a lot of stats that stick out about this matchup because Kansas State has emerged recently, coming off a loss here a week ago to Texas, but K-State has been one of the hottest teams in the Big 12 not too long ago, upsetting Oklahoma in a major fashion.
Yeah, you talk about that big win over Oklahoma, that one coming by a touchdown, but this team is coming off a 3-point loss. Dicker, the kicker at Texas, really was the one.
Again.
Yep, he came in for the Longhorns, won that one right there at the end. But it's remarkable to see really what this KSU team has been able to do under first-year head coach Chris Kleiman. And you look, he's one of the new guys that's in the Big 12. I think 4 or 5 new coaches here in the Big 12 Conference. And this team has really, I think, has been able to step up from where it was last year. You look when these guys came into Morgantown, Will Greer had a few interceptions there, I think in the first quarter alone, but they still weren't able to really do anything from that. Flip it to the other side now, and this defense seems to be pretty stout this year for the Wildcats. Very good on third down. It's second in the Big 12 Conference in scoring defense as well. Earlier this week, Coach Brown had said, or I believe it was co-offensive coordinator Matt Moore, that said he thinks that they have 2 of the best defensive ends in the Big 12 Conference as well. And then you look on the other side, Skylar Thompson, a guy that West Virginia faced last year. He actually came out at the end of that game. They put in Alex Denton there for him, but this year he's been very good on the ground, been very good through the air, and this is a team that really seems to be clicking on all cylinders. Coach Brown had said that West Virginia got exposed last weekend versus Texas Tech. If the Mountaineers don't make those necessary changes, it's going to be the same thing in Manhattan.
A similarity to Kansas between Kansas State and a couple of teams that WVU has played this season is that K-State really is a veteran team this year. Very similar to Baylor, West Virginia's 2 opponents ago for West Virginia at this point. A lot of veteran guys on that Baylor team, a lot of veteran guys on this Kansas State team, a reason why the Wildcats were able to pull off that upset against Oklahoma. And The veteran nature of that team is the reason why K-State leads in a couple of really important statistics in the Big 12. One of them is time of possession. Nobody dominates time of possession in the Big 12 like Kansas State. But beyond that, K-State also extremely good on third downs defensively, has only given up a 26% conversion rate to its opponents. So roughly 1 in every 4 third downs, it allows a conversion defensively. That's really good. And it's bad news for West Virginia because the Mountaineers have the worst third down efficiency rating on offense in the entire Big 12. You add in the fact that WVU has really struggled in the red zone as well. There's been a lot of critical situations in recent weeks where West Virginia just hasn't been able to get the job done. Too many turnovers, too many miscommunications, even going back to the Baylor game with the bad snaps last week, a couple of instances where there were incompletions or even interceptions in the red zone or end zone. WVU was 2 for 5 against Texas Tech last week. Now, you may look at the red zone stats in the Big 12 and see that Kansas State defensively has given up a score every time its opposition has made it into the red zone and think, okay, K-State doesn't have that good of a red zone defense, right? But the Wildcats have allowed 22 red zone trips to opponents. 10 of them have ended in field goals. So they're limiting guys, they're limiting opponents to only 3 points on almost half of those red zone trips, whereas WVU hasn't even been able to finish in the red zone in recent games. So those are a couple of stats to really keep an eye on, in my opinion, this week. Critical downs and critical situations close to the goal line. What can West Virginia do against this veteran K-State team that has such a good defensive front? Can it get that push? Can it finish drives? It couldn't against Texas Tech. It'll need to against K-State.
Yeah, 2 years ago, West Virginia went into Manhattan, Kansas, was able to get its first win there in the Big 12 Conference. We'll see if the Mountaineers can make it 2 straight this weekend. We will continue to preview this West Virginia K-State matchup coming up this weekend on a brand new episode of The Neil Brown Show, so make sure to check your local listings.
And don't forget to join us live from Manhattan Saturday morning for 2 hours of Mountaineer Game Day, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on your local Xtra station in West Virginia and continuing at 11 on AT&T Sportsnet. We'll bring you our keys to a Mountaineer victory, bring you more on Kansas State in our Know Your Opponent segment, and bring you the final word from head coach Neil Brown. And a very special thanks, as always, to our friends at the Varsity Club Catering Services, provided by the Varsity Club Sports Tavern of Morgantown each and every week for Mountaineer Game Day Extra. Joined by sensational Sam the Man, our web producer for Ask MGD Extra. What's going on, Sam?
Nothing much. I'm flattered, Nick. Thank you very
you're
much
welcome.
for the kind
You're
A new
words.
nickname every week.
Love alliterations, you know.
Alliteration, the alliteration nation.
That's what we are.
Now, one of the biggest talking points on social media, now obviously it's a 5-game skid. That's a tough look. But one of the biggest talking points, on social media was how does this team stay motivated through the rest of the season? They got 3 more games. How do they stay motivated? George Campbell actually addressed that on Tuesday when he was asked that. So let's take a look what he had to say.
Honestly, as a team, we stay motivated. Coach Brown does a great job of it, but we have a team full of guys that are good guys, and they, even though we're losing, it sucks. But obviously, we want to go to a bowl game. We want to win out. But the only thing that we can do right now is take it week by week, and with the week goes by, we take it day by day and make sure that we do everything in practice that we can to execute in the game.
Alrighty, guys. So now that we took a look at that, what's your biggest takeaway from that quote?
Well, I actually asked George Campbell that question, and he had said, like you had heard, one of the things that really keeps this team motivated is head coach Neil Brown really doesn't allow them to get down in the dumps. I don't remember maybe 2 games after the Kansas win would have been 2 losses then for West Virginia. Coach Brown had said, despite what people think, it's not doom and gloom in this building. That was a quote from him a couple weeks ago, and he said that it's really been the same thing. This team, while it does have the self-inflicted wounds, while it does have the struggles, when you look, put coaching staff aside, everything of that, when you looked at the roster that this team really came in with this year, you knew things were going to be a little bit of a struggle. You're relying on guys who they may look 4th, 5th year guys, but they hadn't had a lot of playing time. Now you've got some true freshmen, and now you've got some redshirt freshmen that are being asked to make some big plays. Now, I think how this team can stay motivated is kind of, remember that like Coach Brown said, we're not in the game of moral victories here, but what he likes to do with this team is celebrate the small things. If a guy has a good performance, you have to recognize that. You have to help them move forward. Same thing, with Sam James. He said things could have been better. He could have really had a good record in that game up against Texas Tech. He did have some drops, but what does he tell him? Look at some of the positives. How this team stays motivated, I think, is remember there's still a lot to play for. While it may not, going up, you still have bowl eligibility on the table. But aside from that, I think just get a couple wins and just be better than you were the week before. We haven't really seen that from these guys, really just kind of one up that performance. I think how you stay motivated is a young team with a new coaching staff. Just realize, like Coach Brown said there at the beginning, you're building a successful program, and it all starts with going 1-0 that week. Stay motivated, focus on that, and try to win, like they say, win the day, win the practice, and then, of course, you got to try to win the game.
So you mentioned James, and one of the most intriguing things to come out of this week's media session is Coach Brown's comments on James' performance. He was the Big 12's newcomer of the week, but he had an opportunity to really break some records for WVU in terms of all single-game receiving performances, but he didn't because he had some drops. I mean, he could have been close to 300 yards. He had 223 yards and was still good to be the Big 12's newcomer of the week for the second time. But what Brown told us is that he's mentioned this a couple of times this season. He coaches James harder than just about anybody else on the team because of how talented he is and because of the role that James has been thrown into. A guy that's so young with a lot of raw talent that's had to be the guy on offense. I mean, not just talking about the guy among wide receivers, the guy on offense to move the football for WVU. He's done it as a runner and as a pass catcher. Brown has coached him harder than anybody else because he needs to get that type of production out of James, not just for this season, but for the future. And I think that when you look at how many other young players are getting serious reps for this team in the final month of the season, that's enough to keep these guys motivated alone. I mean, this month of November is critical for these young players, right? There's so many young guys in the defensive secondary that continue to get reps. There are guys on the other side of the ball on offense that are kind of like Sam James, becoming the face of this program for the future. Those guys, it shouldn't be hard to keep them motivated because every single rep for those guys is important as WVU tries to lay the foundation for the future.
Mathematically, bowl eligibility is still on the table, albeit a long shot. So at least getting a couple of wins is definitely good for morale heading into the next season. Now, speaking of motivation, there's a game on Friday that nobody really needs to be motivated for. We have the backyard brawl, at Pitt for West Virginia Hoops. One of the biggest takeaways I had in their victory last week over Akron, 94-84, was while we can see a dynamic and deep backcourt for West Virginia, there's going to be a lot of issues in the front court. You have Oscar Shibwe, Derek Culver, and Logan Rout, but beyond that, not a whole lot to really fill in those shoes, especially when they get in foul trouble like you saw Oscar Shibwe did and Derek Culver later in the game. So that'll be interesting to play out. Nick, what are you looking forward to and to see on Friday?
So I expected to be wowed by a freshman in that first game against Akron. The guy that wowed me was not the one that I thought it would be. Assumed it would be Oscar Shibwe, right? But he got into foul trouble. I think only played 12 minutes and was very limited. And that's a lesson that Shibwe is going to have to learn. Learn how to play with fouls, learn how to not get into foul trouble, but still be effective if you're on the floor with 3 fouls. The guy that was most impressive, though, was Deuce McBride. Absolutely incredible debut performance for McBride. Yeah, he had some mistakes. I want to say he had 4 turnovers, which you're going to have as a freshman guard, right? But it seemed that every time he made a mistake, he made up for it on the defensive end. I mean, when you talk about press Virginia, the type of mentality, scrappy play that Bob Huggins tries to instill in his guys, Deuce McBride already has it, and he's only played 1 official game for WVU. He had 11 points. Him and Taz Sherman really energized WVU with their performances off the bench, but McBride in general, I mean, just made some incredible plays in transition, a great block against Akron. Just really solid performance from him. Want to see what he can continue to do. And it's an interesting dynamic because McBride, a freshman in his very first game, sort of upended Jordan McCabe, and who only played 1 minute and 6 seconds in the second half, sat the rest of the game on the bench. McBride and Brandon Napper both played more minutes than Jordan McCabe did, but Huggins mentioned after the game, it's all about giving the team an opportunity to win. He thought McBride could do that on that night. Maybe it's going to be McCabe that does it against Pitt or somewhere else down the road. So the biggest takeaway overall, not just McBride's great play, Huggins has been talking about depth. this team definitely has it. It does seem that this team is going to have it, and it's so much better in that regard than last season.
Yeah, I think it was in the beginning, West Virginia's bench had like 17 straight points, I think, outscored Akron's bench 42-9.
Yep.
So great bench play there for WVU. I think that's the one thing. I'm not going to pick a specific player. I was most impressed with Deuce. I'm not going to pick a specific player. I think overall this weekend, or I should say Friday, I'm anxious to see how that group of young guys handles this type of setting. I'm sure coming into this game, they have to be, they're going to be told about this backyard brawl. It's something that they knew coming here to West Virginia, how really intense this game is going to be. And we saw it last year coming in West Virginia and Pitt, or 2 years ago up at Pitt. It was a pretty crazy game up there. So anxious to see. Unfortunately, we will be in Manhattan, Kansas, so we won't be able to be there. But Sam will be there to keep you covered. But one thing, though, that I was looking for in men's basketball was 14 total turnovers, 11 in the second half. Yep. We had saw so many times last year. There was that point right there at the end of the first half and into the second to where this team just kind of got off the rails a little bit. I think we saw it again starting in the beginning of the second half. You go up, you build a lead, and some self-inflicted mistakes kind of come into play. But the one thing to remember here is with so many young guys, some communication things to work out. Good to be 1-0 because that's not where this team was last year. But I think pretty bright future for West Virginia. I know everybody's always wanting to know, is this an NCAA tournament team?
Right.
I think certainly this team could be. I don't see any reason it couldn't, but let's just enjoy watching this young team grow. I think this is going to be a really fun group, and something we talked about after the game, they seem just to get along so well.
Yeah, definitely.
They really enjoy playing with each other. They really enjoy playing for each other, and that's something that we really didn't see last year. We talk about all the off-the-court issues, but I think this year, you talk about everything that really needs to be in place to have a successful team. I think Coach Huggins has it.
I need to get something off my chest really quickly, Sam, before we move on here.
Of course, Nick.
Why are we playing the backyard brawl in November? I get that the answer is probably out of a lot of people's hands, and it might have to do with network contracts and things like that, but to play the backyard brawl, the biggest non-conference game on West Virginia's schedule with 3 weeks to go in football season, I hope it doesn't happen next year when it's maybe the final time that these teams play for the foreseeable future, because it's a 4-game series and game number 4 is coming up next year at the Coliseum. I did some research on this because I was wondering about it.
Because, of course.
Right. So the Post-Gazette reported when this deal was struck that there were going to be 4 games played, and all of them were supposed to be played on Saturdays in December, but the contract stated that everything was kind of up for debate, right, that games could change. And the ACC has kind of thrown a curveball, and Pitt is playing some conference games early in the season, opened the year with a conference game against Florida State. Believe they play Louisville on the first Saturday in December, which was around the time that this game has been played the last 2 seasons. It's just a bummer from our perspective because we're not going to be able to be there because we're going to be covering football. But Pitt plays a Thursday night football game at home and then is going to play the backyard brawl. I mean, this game should be the focus of the non-conference schedule, and it's not. It's kind of getting maybe overlooked in a way. Now, we'll see. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a big crowd. The players are going to be ready to play. Just kind of a bummer. We've talked to some fans who have said, just snuck up on us. Like, I didn't realize it was going to be West Virginia's second game of the year. Yeah. So now for Pitt, on the other hand, it's going to be Pitt's 4th game of the year. Pitt played Florida State, lost to Nicholls State, a team that WVU has on the schedule in December, plays Robert Morris, or played them this week, and then West Virginia. So I think you might have seen a little bit of rust from WVU against Akron. Pitt's going to have 3 games under its belt. That dynamic could play a role in the game. Don't doubt that Coach Huggins is going to have his guys ready to go for a game that's going to be as energized as this one. But I just hope that next year this game gets the billing that it deserves, especially if it's going to be the last one in this series for the next 5 or more years. Who knows?
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you for letting me get that off my chest.
Of course, no, hey, rant hour.
Only the
least we still have
that we've heard it.
At least we still have Pitt WVU baseball to hold us over until the football series comes back.
There we go.
So that's good.
Definitely. But as Nick and Angelica said, we're going to be split this weekend. Nick and Angelica are going to be in Manhattan, the smaller one, in Kansas.
The Little Apple.
The Little Apple, as they call it. And myself and Jamie Green behind the camera, we are going to be in Pitt for the basketball game on Friday. Obviously, the football game is on Saturday. So what you're going to need to do is follow us on social media, at WV Illustrated on Twitter, West Virginia Illustrated on Facebook. Next week, send us in a question, of course. We'll be sure to answer it. and hopefully we'll be answering questions about a Mountaineer victory in the backyard brawl.
Well, you know what else is coming up on Saturday? First round of the NCAA tournament
Yes.
for the WVU women's soccer team.
WVU women's soccer team drew Georgetown for the first round. They snuck in Monday. Monday they got the announcement was made. So that's very exciting.
20th consecutive
how incredible is
NCAA
that?
tournament.
Yeah.
Something that we were laughing at, that we saw the fake Bob Huggins on Twitter tweeted at Coach Izzo Brown and said the last time the WVU women's soccer team was not in the NCAA tournament, Emmett Matthews was less than 2 weeks old. We thought that was kind of funny. And she said most of the people on my team weren't even born. And that's just one thing that we have talked about. We haven't got a chance to talk a lot of soccer here on the program, but if you want to talk about a team that has really just faced adversity, it's got to be Coach Izzo Brown's women's soccer team. This team, finished 10-7, 10-7-2, I believe.
That's right.
That stretch there at the beginning where it was like 8 out of their first 10, 11 opponents were ranked inside the top 25. A really tough stretch for them. Dealt with a lot of injuries too. We talk about the people that they lost. So many people graduated from the year before, and then you start the season with arguably your best player in Lauren Segala tearing her ACL. Then Julianne Valorand really came on there. Then she got injured. Riley Foster was injured there for a stretch, and really just the way that this team was able to dig deep and find the wins whenever it mattered to be able to earn this postseason appearance here. Now, Georgetown did win here in Morgantown earlier in the regular season, 3-0, but what an accomplishment for Coach Izzo Brown's team. Certainly looking forward to watching how they do bout out of the Big 12 Conference tournament early. You know that they're going to want to get that taste out of their mouth as well.
You can argue that this is a down year for Izzo Brown's program with only 10 victories, but 20 consecutive NCAA tournament bids. Just to reiterate that, I believe it's tied for the 5th longest
Nikki
active
needs
streak.
her statue.
Can we also remind the folks at home that she built this program essentially from the ground up?
Right, that's right.
She basically came out of college and built the program from the ground up. She's a legend.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's a legend.
That's why she needs a statue.
To take such a young and inexperienced team to the NCAA tournament, I mean, just from the perspective of you get to the postseason, you get to experience it, right? There's a lot of freshmen and sophomores, underclassmen that have played a significant role on this team. It's good for them too, as we talk about building for the football team, how important these last 3 weeks of the season will be for that unit. Same with women's soccer as well. The NCAA tournament, and who knows, saw Georgetown, know what that team's about. Maybe can have a little Nikki Izzo Brown magic, and the Mountaineers can pull off an upset.
There's been a few years where they haven't ended the regular season well, but have performed pretty good in the postseason. Maybe this could be one of them.
Everybody's 0-0. Everybody's 0-0.
Well, so that's a lot on Saturday. A lot happening on Saturday, football and women's soccer. So
busy weekend.
Of course, we'll keep you updated on all of it on the socials that Sam mentioned.
Stay with us on digital at WV Illustrated.
Way to go, Sam.
That's
always there to plug us on social media. No Wolf's Howl this week, but you can see the Wolfman on his regular spots on the Neil Brown Show and Mountaineer Game Day coming up this weekend. To remind you, a new episode of the Neil Brown Show coming up Friday and Saturday, while Mountaineer Game Day, 2 hours of live coverage from Manhattan, Kansas, comes your way Saturday morning, starting at 10 on your local Nexstar station and continuing at 11 a.m. on AT&T Sportsnet. It all leads up to that 3:30 Eastern kick between Kansas State and WVU on ESPN.
Yeah, we'll see you on the Neil Brown Show. We'll see you on Mountaineer Game Day. We appreciate you being with us here on this new episode of Mountaineer Game Day Extra. It's Sam, it's Nick, it's Angelica. We'll see you next week.
Okay, bye. See everybody. All these cameras. Good.